Hey, do you want to come over and make a pot of tea, bring your favorite crystals? We could talk about our birth charts, spirits, the latest house spells we've been doing. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm that witch next door. Hello, neighbor. Welcome back to another spooky, wonderful episode here at That Witch Podcast. I am so excited for today's episode with all of you. Since our last episode together last year, so many of you have reached out to me about how much you loved my first conversation with our guest today. And she was absolutely the first person I thought of when I thought of today's episode topic. So please join me in welcoming back Miss Angelica Cresci. Hi.
Hi. Yes. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed coming on. Was it last year? That's so crazy.
I didn't realize it, but when I went back to reach out to you, I was like, oh my God, almost all of our messages and emails were exactly, we set it up in September and released in October. It was hilarious. So yeah, it's been like this full solar cycle.
I love it. Yeah. I'm so glad to be back and thanks for having me.
So just to give anybody else a little bit of a background, especially if this is your first episode here at That Witch Podcast, what a special one to find yourself at. We are doing spirit safety for all month long of October and possibly into November, all throughout Scorpio season, honestly, because many spiritualists, witches, pagans, mystics, especially this time of year, feel this call and this pull and this nudge to communicate with the other side of the veil, or honestly, to just kind of like pull at the veil in general, I think. Mm-hmm. And something that comes up is people's curiosity about what it means to meditate in or walk through the underworld. And I think this is something as death witches and witches that work with Hades or any other chthonic deities, we kind of know what we mean through experience from doing it. Mm-hmm. But I would love to offer folks an idea of not just what they might be getting into, but what the overall kind of sacred purpose of this work is, because I think it's important that we have those little curiosities, but at the same time, like, this is a really, really sacred type of work and a sacred type of path. So my first question for you, my dear, is how long would you say you been meditating with Hades and traveling to the underworld?
Yeah. Thank you. I love this question. Yeah. I think I've been working with Hades like properly. Like I, connected to him, identified him as a deity, started working with him for about a decade now. But I honestly feel like I've been traveling to the underworld and connecting with the underworld, and then him sort of as an extension of that for a very long time since I was a child. I have so many memories as a kid, like strange memories that I can't quite place, of like almost seeing Hades, like I'm like falling asleep and I'm like almost having like a lucid dreaming moment. I'm like seeing Hades like watching me, and I hadn't quite put it together that that's what was going on, or maybe he was guiding me into the underworld. But I still have very surreal dreams. And I remember when I was a kid, I would always dream about what I now know as the underworld, going into the underworld, going around. I remember I used to love like spooky movies when I was a kid, especially like I loved The Corpse Bride because they like go to the like afterlife. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been here. Like this is so familiar to me. So yeah, for a very long time.
This is so cool. Especially because I have quite a feeling that this is a bit more of a shared experience than a lot of people realize. That's exactly what happened for me when I made the official connection the very first time that I had this nudge, like, I think I'm ready to work with deities. I kind of feel like someone's already been reaching out to me. I kind of want to figure out who that is. When I put two and two together that it was Hades, it was much more of an oh, duh moment because of how many experiences throughout my life. It was like pretty they obviously associated with spirit work, working with the underworld, and the dead in general. So, what I want to ask you next, so we start dabbling into this, because I think one of the biggest questions I also get as an astrologer, both Angelica and I do witchcraft mentoring and instruction, but pair so much with astrology, which is like my favorite when we can talk the star language too. Yes. So first I would love to know, when you look at your own birth chart, what are the placements that you see that kind of show up as, oh, I'm a chthonic witch, or yeah, I'm definitely meant to work with Hades and walk the underworld?
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Don't you love that?
So, oh my God, I love it. Yeah, I'm a professional ancient astrologer, so this is like very exciting for me.
Yay.
Well, so when I think about I'll say like my chart, and then I'll say like in general. When I look at my chart, I have a 12th house moon conjunct Pluto, which I feel like is it's giving the underworld, it's giving Hades, it's giving that. I think 12th house placements or 8th house placements in general, especially like a luminary, I think creates an interest in the occult and in the underworld and in other places, and places that are not quite as, like accessible or tangible. I see that a lot. I think, yeah, the moon Pluto is such a phenomenon, and I love it. And I know a lot of other chthonic witches with that, or the moon, Pluto conjunct the sun, that sort of thing. I also have my moon on the fixed star Antares, which is like the heart of the Scorpion. So it's in tropical Sagittarius, but it's in the heart of the Scorpion constellation. And that is a royal fixed star. It is, I feel like all the royal fixed stars, we can kind of create connections with like tarot archetypes and connections potentially with deities and that sort of thing. And so Antares is the Watcher of the West, like the King of Cups kind of energy. And it's just it reminds me of Hades, the story of Antares being almost like the King of the Underworld, or the opposite of Aldebaran, who is like the good king, the King of Pentacles, who is just, never does anything wrong and is perfect and very unproblematic. But Antares is all about rising up through fear, obsession, all these deep underworld things, right? And rising into leadership and being like, okay, like I am claiming my shadows and I'm going to rise up from that. So that's sort of the energy of Antares. And I very much feel like it's connected to the underworld. So that's all on my birth chart. That's what I'm like, okay, there it is. Chthonic witch vibes for sure. But I definitely think that, like, if you have a lot of placements, I know I mentioned like the 12th house, the 8th house, but even if you have a lot of placements in the lower half of the chart, that's like, typically it's the deepest part of the chart. Like I'm talking like second house through like 6th house. It's, under the horizon, in the underworld, that sort of thing. I think even very strong placements with like Saturn, angular placements with Saturn, that type of thing. Sometimes I notice, this is something I'm more looking at as like a potential connection, but I noticed there's a fixed star called Gemma, and it is like the crown. And I feel like I see a lot of people with Gamma in their birth chart. It's in, I believe it's in tropical Libra, like in the middle of tropical Libra, with underworld connections, because it's sort of like the crown. It reminds me of Hades. It reminds me of that type of thing.
That's so, I love this. I love this so much. I have so many. So first, I love that you brought up our hemispheres of the chart, because I think that especially in beginner, you're learning so many parts and pieces, right? Like astrology is like taking a fire hose to the mouth, especially when you're starting out. We forget the simplicity and the symbolism of just the top half of the chart compared to the bottom half of the chart. So if you have a night chart, for example, if you were born at night and your sun is in the lower hemisphere of the chart, this is a simple but can be a really powerful indicator that just in general, you feel these affinities to darkness and shadows and shadow work and walking that type of path more so say than somebody who does have a daytime chart with their sun in the upper half of the hemisphere. And I have my Pisces moon in my Pisces ruled 8th house, and it makes an exact trine to my Pluto in my 4th. That's conjunct my IC. And so this like super like deep root of the chart for me personally, obviously, like I do a lot of ancestral generational type work. I am so fascinated by history and going back as literally far as I can possibly go. And then Cancer rules my 12th, which is where my Chiron placement is. So there's a lot of subconscious world of the unseen kind of exploration. I love doing as well. Sometimes I can take these parts of myself a little bit for granted, can feel, and you mentioned this as well, can feel really natural to travel to those places. It can feel pretty easy to get into a meditative state. What would you say? What is something that you maybe already advise students and clients and followers of yours to help get to these meditative trance-like states, especially where if maybe there's parts of the chart or parts of themselves that can feel really blocked in fully like letting go, you know what I mean? Really allowing themselves to get to that space.
Yeah, I think getting into some type of a trance state or altered state, gnosis, I think is really important for any type of magic, but especially when we are trying to do any type of travel or underworld travel or, whatever it is, astral travel. So I think especially if you feel really blocked and you feel like it's not working for you, I think just kind of trying to get that narrative not like out of your head completely, but just be like, okay, maybe the way that it's being described to me by others is like not the way that I was meant to experience it. Because I guarantee you that like everybody, even people who feel like they're blocked, engage in trance-like states all the time. I mean, think about like right before you go to sleep. I like was getting a facial yesterday. I like fell asleep on the esthetician table, but I like didn't feel like I was asleep. I was like, I'm in the room, I'm here. And then my esthetician's like, oh, you were kind of like dozing off. I was like, was I? Like, I don't even know. I think I was just in this like trance of like relaxation or whatever. So notice when that stuff happens, like when you drive, when you're going on a long walk and you're just not even thinking and you're just you're getting into that state. And then from there, you can kind of say like, okay, what was potentially helpful for that, I don't think that pushing thoughts out of your brain is always helpful when you're like sitting down, like trying to meditate. I don't think that again, Moon conjunct Pluto on Antares, like I am always thinking and ruminating and that sort of thing. I think we talked about this last time, but, and so I think it's just helpful to go like, okay, what historically has worked for me, even in non-magical settings, and like, how can I do that? So for me, I love dancing. I'm obsessed with dancing, and I like to do that before any ritual. And sometimes I'm literally like dancing in the ritual. Sometimes I'm not, but it's sort of like, okay, I've gotten myself into this space where I feel looser. I feel more connected to my body and therefore the underworld and other realms.
Such good advice there. I think that some of the worst advice that we're given is to empty our mind of thoughts when it comes to meditation. I recorded an entire episode on meditating because of how much I hate that and how much that notion has turned so many people away from such an important piece of energetic and magical work, like you said, and ritual work. I completely agree. Also, exactly, you are probably achieving these states of mind way more often than you're realizing. Again, because there's this misconception that an empty mind is what means that you're meditating. I have Mars in Gemini, and my Mercury in Scorpio is conjunct that Pluto and IC. So thinking is a huge part of all of my ritual work. So much of my direct line communication, especially since I have that Pisces moon, is like completely nonverbal and takes place like completely within me. But I've realized that over time, when I was a kid and when I was a teenager, and I would get made fun of for talking to myself all the time. It was such a strength, and I never realized it. This internal dialogue was something that I learned to hone in on. And once I was working with specific energies, entities, deities, because I work with the planets in my chart really honestly, like I work with deities more than anything. I really address each and work with each as these really personified deities. And it's just, this is why I'm so grateful that I always say I came to astrology through the witchcraft door, because that just made sense to me to do it that way. So offerings to Mercury and Saturn and Pluto, like this is all very natural to me. But a lot of that communication is taking place in this inner dialogue. And it's when that is most naturally happening that it's one of my biggest indicators I'm in a meditative state. And this is different than battling like anxious and intrusive thoughts. And seasoned witches and practitioners, simply through practice and experience, I think, have learned how to distinct when we're in like an intrusive thought loop and anxiety is what's coming through. And when we're in like a channeled state, right? And we're like actually receiving like information. What has that kind of looked like for you as well? I think that's probably one of the top questions and discussions in my school is how do I know it's intuition versus anxiety? Because I do think this is important in all ritual work, but especially in working with other beings.
Yeah. I think the first thing I'll say is when it's intuitive, when it's like some type of inner knowing of some kind, I feel like for everybody, it's going to have a very specific feeling to it. For me, the only way I can describe it is almost like Chiron energy, where it's like this wise figure is like rising up, and it's like this knowing. It's like almost like this like claircognizance of like, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but this is coming up, and it's very calming and it's very wise and it's very, like Chiron, like the healer, the centaur who's a healer, being like, this is the information I'm giving to you, right? So for you, it might feel different. For you, it might feel kind of bubbly and fizzy or whatever. Like it could have so many different flavors, if you will, but it's very calm for the most part. It's going to be exciting and calm. And you almost go, whoa. Where did that come from? What is like, whoa, what is happening? Like, it's kind of exciting. Whereas anxiety is, I think usually anxiety begins earlier in the day. Like, you kind of wake up. This is what my therapist always says. Like, you wake up and for whatever reason, that's just kind of running a little higher, or something happens that is distressing to you. And then you're in kind of like that state the whole day. And then it feels very heightened and scary and like, like I just see like almost like a heart rate monitor and like the heart rate jumping, like as the analogy, you know, it's very jumpy, whereas intuition is very grounding.
I love that. Yeah. It's like that erratic versus like really stable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I work with Mercury a lot, and Mercury is ruled by Pluto in my chart. So there's so much of my direct work with Mercury that very often feels like the orders are coming from, but that's where the teacher is like at that time. And Mercury energy is still, you know, really airy and high energy to me, but it is still very deliberate. Like it's when the messages come through, even though they're faster and zingier and lightning, they're deliberate. And anxiety comes with an awful lot of questions, not thought provoking, right? Not wisdom provoking questions, but like, what about this? What do you think would happen if this happened? Right. And there's just an awful lot of questioning. So I love that you brought up that sensation of that inner knowing. Anxiety thinks that they know, but they only think that they know. Intuition knows through and through and through and through. And honestly, over time, the truth is like sometimes you'll listen to anxiety instead of your intuition, and later on you'll learn, oh, that was anxiety, and now I know next time. You know, that's where a lot of my practice came from, is like not being afraid to make mistakes. You know what I mean? We're not perfect at this work, which leads me to my next question. Have you what are maybe mistakes that you've made along the way, especially in any of your deity work, underworld or death work as a witch? What were some mistakes that you kind of learned? I'm going to keep that in mind for future reference.
Mistakes. Oh my goodness. I would say when it comes to trance work like this, and specifically around like my mistakes with that, I would say creating some type of sacred space is important. I'm not the type of person that's like casting a circle for every little thing. Like I've done plenty of spells without casting circles and that sort of thing. It's very much like, okay, what am I trying to do here? Why am I trying to call in sacred space? Am I trying to have a container for something? Am I trying to protect myself from outside energies? Am I trying to have something come into the circle, keep something out? Like what exactly are we doing? And so I think when it comes to trance work, underworld work, even deity evocation in general, I would say it's like, okay, I am both wanting to create a container and wanting to, or a vessel for me to travel with. And I'm also wanting to potentially keep certain things out and create a boundary. So, definitely casting some type of protective layer around me. Sometimes this is like a mind bubble kind of thing. Sometimes this is, I imagine it as like, you know, this like fiery wall around me, like fiery wall protection kind of inspired. Sometimes it's like your classic circle, your classic traditional witchcraft circle. It really depends. And so I would say that that's the thing that I have come to, because when I haven't, whether it's like, even sometimes I'm just sleeping and I'm like, whoa, I feel like I'm really energetically vulnerable right now. I will like sit and, you know, try to cast like a bubble of protection around me. So I find that to be really important.
So when it comes to whether these are so many good examples too, casting circles, mental bubbles or like orbs, these energetic walls, and they can be, you know, you can cast these simply in your mind's eye, or you can mark them with physical objects. Everybody has their own way. And you bring up such a great specification there. It really depends on what you're doing, honestly. It really depends on the purpose of why you're there in that moment. When casting these these protective barriers, what are some of, in your opinion, like the most go-to or just most effective, maybe protective correspondences that you either, picture and visualize, or you do physically incorporate? What are your favorite energetic protectors, if you will?
Yeah, I love this. So, first of all, my athame, like my ritual dagger, my friends make fun of me because I like carry it around with me like all the time. It's like they call it my emotional support athame because it's just like, Angelica, do you have a big tote bag? Is your athame in there? Yeah, of course. Like it's my emotional support athame. I'm like, it's there with me always. And so it's there with me in ritual. I always have it on me. I usually sleep next to it. It's this symbol of Mars and Saturn to me, right? I have a black handle dagger, which is Saturn, and then the Mars is like the metal, and then Saturn also is involved in that too. But to me, it's like this tool where it drives away spirits, it drives away any negative energies or entities. Entities don't like it when you point swords or knives at them. Surprise. So that I always have on me, and it's helpful for directing energy if I'm casting a circle or doing a banishing or anything like that. I like to have that. I really like Angelica root. It's my namesake herb. And so I think maybe I just like it because it's my namesake herb, but it is so helpful because the energy of Angelica is very protective against evil and negativity. It's very warding and banishing of that. And it really, when you create a relationship with it, it's going to seek to protect you and to also bring in positive things as it banishes the negative. So I find that I'm usually always wearing a piece of Angelica root. I have it all around my house, like hanging up in different places. You could totally create some type of like wash or spray, or even like an oil distillation of it as well. I like rue. Cypress is what I usually burn for banishing. I connect it to Hades, and it's, super cleansing and that sort of thing. It smells really nice, like as a burn wand. So I usually use cypress. Rosemary can be really nice. If you really want something strong, like sulfur, I know it's kind of funny, but really nice and banishing. Anything super pungent, patchouli, mullein. Yeah, I love all of those.
Such good suggestions. I especially like how you bring up Angelica root and like your connection to it, because that in and of itself is such good advice. If there's this herb or this tool or this crystal that feels really protective for you, it probably is a guardian of yours. You're sensing a protective guardian. So I've always got like books of correspondences and bookmarks on my computer for them, especially because people ask for them a lot. But your best book of correspondences is like, what energy do you sense from that object, or that color, or that symbol? For example, one of my favorite things to do is visualize our entire property on top of like a glowing pentacle, like, and the whole property is just like protected in this dome that comes from that. And that in and of itself can be a really, really effective protection ritual. But I think that it is simpler than people realize. And I probably find that the biggest misstep, that's why I'm so glad you brought this up. I think the biggest misstep most people make is just energetic boundaries in the very, very first place in any type of this work. So you also said, which is so good, you brought up how the feel of the underworld, what it looks like, how it presents itself to you, really truly is unique person to person. Would you mind sharing with us what it is like for you and what it kind of feels like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. So the underworld, there's so many things. I mean, there's so many like access points. First of all, like I'm even just imagining, okay, where do we start? Like
Mm-hmm.
all the access points into the underworld. There's caves, water, rivers, like all like estuaries in general, oceans. Oftentimes the underworld is sort of depicted as, yeah, you can enter through a cave or you can get to it, sail to it via some type of, water or ocean or something. So both of those are true and can be true. And so I feel like in the past, when I've gone to the underworld, when I've done this work, I typically imagine myself like going down in like a mine cart. Like I am just like, all right, like we're going down, we're getting lowered like an elevator, like into the underworld, like through a cave. And I'm walking out into this vast space, and it's very like rural. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine, right? But it's like, feel silly saying this, but it's like mountains and pastures and meadows, and it's just very like, I remember being like in Montana and being like, yeah, this is kind of giving underworld, like not gonna lie. And because it's just it's so vast,
Yes.
and I find that these, like, there is, to me, there's like a sky, but it's kind of like a reddish purple. Like it's this sort of, it kind of casts the whole underworld with this glow. And I feel like some of the plants are, to me, colors that I wouldn't expect. Like I feel like there's a lot of really interesting like flora and fauna that I'm always down there like, what is happening down here? This is so fascinating and interesting. A lot of reds, a lot of purples. That's why I love red, the color red, because I always see it when I go to the underworld. Pomegranates are red.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like visually what it feels like. And I just always notice like this rushing sound of water. Water is so important. Water and earth are hugely important for accessing the underworld. One of the things I actually asked Hades, I was like, is there anything specifically that you want me to say in this episode? Because this is actually so funny. I was like blow drying my hair today, and like out of nowhere, like a spider comes out and like hits me in the face. I'm like, what is happening? Spiders are my Hades sign. I was like, okay, Hades. Like I'm like blowing it away with the blow dryer. I'm like, what do you want to say? And he was like, he said, Angelica, I want you to talk about Earth. I want you to talk about Gaia. And he turned my attention to the line of the Orphic hymn where it's the Orphic hymn to Hades or Pluton, where it says, Earth is the seat of the gods, the mighty lap of mortals. And you have to access Gaia in order to enter into the underworld. And I think that Gaia can be so protective as well. Like she can be so maternal and protective, and she literally is here to protect all of us, and also, asks for our respect in return. And she witnesses like Persephone going into the underworld. She sees it. She's there. She's part of the whole thing. And I think that he kind of brought her up as, make sure you highlight her and the folks who are listening. Like by calling upon her when you're doing this work, you're not only rooting yourself to the earthly realm, which is important when you're traveling anywhere, but she's also kind of guiding you in there and watching. And it can create, again, this really grounded sense of, yeah, we're traveling to another realm, but we're doing it in this like safe way with Gaia.
So good. All through September, we focused on elemental magic on my podcast for a reason. It's all been this big lead up to this discussion this whole month and everything we'll be doing for the rest of the year. And when I dropped the Earth episode, the Death Witches came out. I was so glad. Because I completely agree. There is so much in the like dirt and twigs and rocks that is so underworldly and so incredibly chthonic and Hades for me. I love that you bring up Gaia because I think that's something we don't typically associate with Gaia, Mother Earth energy. We picture these like abundant, bright green fields with a rainbow of flowers and a bright blue sky and a shining sun and all these birds and animals. Gorgeous, all true things. And I would say, not even but, and there is this whole other side to Earth. And it's the side that we call like ugly or dead or not aesthetically pleasing. I have such a deep love and reverence and appreciation for like so much of Gaia to me is like crone energy, this like deep old Baba Yaga. Like she takes all. She has no judgment over what you send into the depths of her earth. You can be this perfectly, on the surface beautiful, or you could be, it doesn't matter at all. This is what I love about in body astrology. Scorpio rules over the digestive system and the sexual reproductive organs and these parts that are taboo or gross or that we don't like talking about. It's why I have a completely rebirth view of swamps on Earth. Swamps are something that humans for way too long have been trying to like fill and cover up and get rid of until science started showing us more and more. Holy cow, these are so incredibly necessary. Stop filling up the swamps. They have such an important role in our ecosystem. They're nature's sewer systems. Honestly, it's almost infinite how much water and waste they can take in. And cypress trees often grow in swamps. So yeah, it are, like you said, very associated with Hades. So I love that so much. And I love that you brought up Earth because I really think that when we think of Earth or talk about it or read about it, often it's like a scene in Bambi, and when you navigate the underworld in meditation or just see it symbolized in your waking life, I think it gives you this whole entire new appreciation for this whole area of Earth that really gets kind of like glazed and glossed over. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. So we've talked a little bit about like getting there. We've talked a little bit about what it might look like and what it might feel like. The obvious biggest question is, what the hell do you do there? What are you doing in there? What do you do while you're in the underworld? What happens? That's like the top question I get. So I'm so excited to hear what that experience is like for you, because it's not singular, obviously, right? But share with us a little bit about what the experience itself is like, or maybe some of its purpose.
For sure. Yeah. I think purpose is really important too, because I think you said this at the top of the episode. Like, it's important to do things with purpose. I'm not like traveling to the underworld every week. Like, it's not really happening. I'm doing it with intention and for specific reasons. So typically when I go to the underworld, I'm doing it to perform some type of transmutation work, to do transmutation work. Like you said, the underworld, Earth, all of it is the biggest tool of transmutation that I think we can use. It can take what we have and it can create something else out of it. And I think of like Zagreus's story, Zagreus Dionysus' story. I think of even just the dead going into the underworld and receiving some type of rebirth, depending on what that looks like for them, in terms of transmutation. I often do it to connect with Hades in his own realm, because I think that certain parts of the year, in certain situations, it's harder for him to come through here, or in certain situations I've found that where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to go straight to the source and and talk to him in the underworld. Sometimes it's to gain wisdom, and it's sort of like this pilgrimage thing. If you think of all the heroes, they like almost all of them at some point, there's a story where they have to go into the underworld. And what is the reason behind that? What's going on with that? And I think it's because one idea is for the ancients, they were really afraid of death. Death was this scary thing. We have like Agamemnon being like, yeah, you do not want to be down here. He's talking to, I believe he's talking to Odysseus when Odysseus goes to the underworld to try to talk to Tiresias. And he's like, don't, this is terrible. And so there's this big fear from the ancients of like, oh my gosh, this place is terrible and scary and we don't want to be here. And so the heroes going on their heroic journey, what it means, what it represented to the ancients was like they're dealing with fear. They're dealing with their own shadows. I mean, literally Heracles has to go as one of his labors. And, he terrible story, right, with Heracles, but he kills his family because Hera like strikes him with madness, and he has these 12 labors of like, how am I going to redeem myself in the eyes of the gods? And one of them is going to the underworld and getting Hades to allow him to bring Cerberus back to the upper world, and that is him confronting his shadows, confronting the Lord of the Underworld, confronting the beast that guards the gates, taming the beast, that sort of thing. There's all these ideas. So the Underworld journey is a symbolic ritual, is even a literal traveling, spiritual traveling ritual that you can do in order to access shadows, in order to understand yourself deeper, in order to overcome certain things. Sometimes I even think looking at the chart, the birth chart is important. You can see a lot of your strengths and your weaknesses in the birth chart, and identifying these and being like, okay, I don't really know what to do with this, but I'm going to go take it to the underworld. I'm going to go take it to Hades or any other chthonic deity, I think can be a really helpful way of doing that. So sometimes when I come out of the underworld, I feel like I've done, like hours and hours of spiritual work or meditation. And maybe I have, with the way that time works. But I find myself healing from things, transmuting things, and coming into a sense of clarity and acceptance that I, wasn't able to do before.
Awesome description. I love this so much. So earlier in the summer, last year we lost our dog, who was our black lab mix, who was very much a familiar of mine, and really was such a part of I like how you say it as well, like when I started purposefully working with Hades and embarking on all of this and mourning her death and all of that grief work for a little over a year. And then this summer, we ended up adopting our next dog, and she ended up being mostly black. She's got some white on her, but she mostly is black, this little pit mix that my daughter named Angel. And my husband and I purposefully elongated her name to Angel of Death, as this dedication and devotion to Hades and Persephone in our home. And let me tell you, friends, those journeys and chapters in your life where it feels like a bunch of shit from your past is getting brought up is such a symbolic journey through the underworld for me. So much of what just seems like, adopting a puppy on the surface has resulted in pages and pages in my Hades journal, because of how much this experience has been surfacing for me. Skeletons coming out of the closet, spirits rising from the grave in a lot of ways, literal dreams about zombies too, literal dreams about like the dead rising in me, like running from these fears and shadows that are getting brought up. And so a lot of the underworld work that I do is this combination of really intentional, almost right, like astral travel, right? This meditation that we're describing. And I think that a lot of us that walk with Hades or Persephone or Hecate or right, any of these chthonic deities, even if you walk with Cerberus, I love that you brought that. I was like, yep, trust me, all the dog stuff today. I went to the library and checked out a bunch of dog books today and out loud was like, this is for you. Like this is a total devotion to you. But I think that those of us that work with these beings and in these themes, you really are able to see where those metaphors show up in your waking life as well. And it's exactly what you just described, where it's recognizing the shadows that are presenting themselves to you and turning toward them. And this is this path to transmutation. I think that where a lot of shadows kind of being in our driver's seat unconsciously comes from trying to turn away from them and trying to hide them and bury them and keep the closet door shut, sweep them under the rug, keep our underworld this super scary taboo place that I don't want to talk about. And so I think that the the it just really highlights exactly what you said about the access points. We're talking about these access points, and we've only really even been able to talk about like a little bit of them. I think that there's so many entryways into underworldly work and learning and walking in so many ways. So this is probably one of the most important parts that I think an incredible amount of new and even like really intermediate practitioners don't think about, forget about, or possibly I'm calling you out, don't think it's important. And it is. Let's talk about closing out our ritual, especially when we are intentionally traveling across the veil, for example. Let's talk about the closings and the goodbyes and I think that's where a lot of missteps happen. What does I'm sure just like casting a circle, this isn't the same exact thing every single time. But what are some of the ways that you really intentionally close out and reground your energy?
Yeah, I love it. I think one thing to keep in mind is this is for like any spell or ritual or astral work, whenever you are creating a container or a space or even in a spell, whenever you are like building something, it's important to be like, okay, how can I like take this apart? It's almost like you're doing a craft and it's like, okay, well, I used clay, so I'm gonna have to put the clay away and I'm gonna have to do this. It's like, think about that magically of like, what does that look like? And so, if you're, I guess for the underworld, I'm imagining, you're casting a circle, you can actually do this ritual process in so many different ways, right? But let's say maybe you are doing some type of meditation or trance, or you're sitting at an altar, or you're laying down and you are, having this experience of travel, of flight. I think you are like accessing the underworld via a portal or via some type of, like we said, like some type of access point. And so you're opening a door. You have to close that door. And that can, again, we can be the architects of our rituals. And I want to give everybody permission to be the architects of your rituals and think about it like symbolically and logically like this. If you imagine yourself opening a door and walking into the underworld, close the door when you leave. There are other ways that we can do that as well. Water, super important when it comes to the underworld. I think in so many cultures, the conception of the underworld has a river. The Babylonians had the river Huber that created this boundary between their underworld, which was called Urkala, and the upper world. So like they had a river. The Greeks have so many rivers. There's just such a concept, water, as a boundary. And so whenever I am coming out of the underworld, I like to sometimes take a ritual bath or a shower or wash my hands. Or when I'm leaving a graveyard, I pour water behind me. And the idea is that I'm literally creating like a little river of the underworld that the spirits then can't cross over. It also just kind of confuses them if they're like, what is... what's happening here? It's the same thing when you take the athame out. They're like, whoa, what is happening here? So water as a banishing tool and a cleansing tool, banishing work of any kind, it can be a banishing ritual that, it could be something that you write. It could be walking around with the athame, telling anything that might have traveled with you back that they're not welcome here. Sometimes the work even continues after the ritual. Sometimes I've noticed I do a spell or ritual and then like 5 days later, I'm like, what is, it doesn't happen a lot, but I'm like, what is going on? I feel like the vibes are off here, and then you're doing more cleansing work, you're doing more banishing, just to, again, make sure that the doors that you opened are duly closed.
So that's perfect setup to my little troubleshooter question, which is I thought I went about this the right way. I took all these steps. My friend or myself, something followed us, something attached to us. Here's my little hot take, and I'd like to ask your opinion about it. People come to me, and I'm sure this happens with you as well, asking for custom like ritual work or custom spell work, especially in the form of cleansings and banishings. Do you do home cleansings? Do you do banishings? I do not think that there's anything wrong with somebody assisting you in ritual work, especially if, let's say you're not a practicing witch, for example. I don't know why you're dabbling in the craft if you're not a practicing witch, but that's a whole other episode. But I don't, however, believe it's required in any way. I believe personally that we have full autonomy over our soul and energy. I really, really, really fully believe that, which means I believe that any attachment is mine to sever, or I at least have the ability to effectively sever it. I don't believe that you absolutely need like the help of a professional, so to speak. How do you feel about that? Do you get asked these kinds of questions and stuff as well about like if you can perform these types of cleansing or anything? Do you think that there are cases where you absolutely need like a just to get really cliche with it, like a demonologist to come perform an exorcism, for example?
That's so funny. Yeah, no, I do agree. I feel like, and this is a big conversation. I feel like there's a lot of like, when do you hire out? When do you not? Yeah. That sort of thing. I think that a lot of people do not think that they have the power to do things. And I think that sometimes is where this comes down to. I also think that when people are like, oh my gosh, how do I prevent this from happening? Or I did something wrong. My thing is like, you might not have done anything wrong. It might have just been meant to be in this way. So then you learn how to deal with this experience. I find that every like strange happening that I've had with magic, everything that has like gone wrong, everything that I've had to troubleshoot, I'm so grateful for that opportunity. And so I don't approach it with fear. I approach it with like, ooh, a little problem. Like this is, if this is like an episode of like a TV show, I'm like, this is the episode where I like figure out banish this entity, and you have to like approach it with that sense of almost excitement. And then I believe when you approach it with the sense of excitement and wonder and interest and curiosity, you're removing the fear from it. And then you, like the character in the TV show, find the ancient grimoire where the spell answer is, or it comes to you in a dream or whatever. The answer comes to you. And so I do think people, run really quickly away from these things, or like, how do I prevent this from happening in totality? And it's like, that's not going to happen. And as a witch, you have to be really comfortable. And this honestly might deter some people from practice for a long time. You do have to be comfortable with a situation where you are going to have to learn really quickly about how to solve it. But that's exciting.
So, such a great answer, because I think that one of the biggest things I try to impress upon people is your true, real belief in the power that you hold is the most powerful tool that you have. And it's okay if you don't have that. It's okay. Most of us have to, we work to that point. Not all of us start out practicing feeling the full extent and belief of our power. Like, we go through self-doubt and self-questioning, and are you sure? And am I good enough? Like, it's a normal part of human nature to like wrestle with inadequacy. But if you could at least believe that you're able to have that belief, that in and of itself can be a really, really, really good starting point. Even if I don't feel it now, I do believe that I have the ability to like fully feel confident in myself. And I completely agree about, when you zoom out far enough, and this is one of the gifts of astrology, honestly, and like studying history and stuff. When you zoom out far enough, usually you can find the purpose or the lesson or the reason something happened, or right. And that's why, going back to our conversation about intuition versus anxiety and mistakes, what is a mistake? Is it a mistake, or is this like a strengthening point? Is this a growth edge point? Is this like an opportunity to fortify those skills that you are, and those abilities that you're honing in on now? When I very first started working with Hades, it was like really solid 2 or 3 years that the fear that would consume me was, I don't know, like, know if I'm ready to just like have spirits like pop up in front of me and like just make themselves known. I was so fearful of that happening. And I thought that something was wrong with me. I was like, oh, I'm a bad death witch or whatever for having that fear. I was meant to have that fear. I was meant to move through that fear. I am able and have been able to help so many other people who experience that now, because I went through it and I know exactly what I can relate to them, and I can show them, hey, there's another side to this. Like, you really do work through it. You really do get more comfortable. A lot of this stuff is practice and experience. And I love the analogy of the show, because I feel like we need to just all get in touch with our inner Buffy, the vampire slayer, and just get out there. Yeah, exactly. This has been such a valuable conversation. I really, really, really appreciate you coming back on again. Angelica, can you tell us what you have been up to, anything exciting and new that you have going on that we can subscribe to, follow, sign up for? How can we work with and support you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you can come over to my Instagram at Angelica Cresci. That's where I hang out most of the time. I do also have a podcast called Diaries of a Witch Podcast. So tune in over there if you want to hear more of my rambles. I love it. And I'm a professional ancient astrologer. I love working with clients who are interested in deity work. I do like a deity exploration reading where we look at, potential deity connections that you might have in your natal chart. I do sort of general natal ancient astrology. And yeah, I have just things happening all the time in Patreon and over on Instagram. So that's where you can find me.
Everything is in the show notes below, of course. And thank you so much again for such a wonderful conversation. It was awesome.
Thank you for having me. It was so fun.
Yay. Neighbor, thank you for your time today and every day. I hope that this episode and others are sparking questions in you, do not hesitate to send those my way or Angelica's way. We love the questions and curiosities that this topic and these subjects bring up for you. We are just right around the corner if you need anything. But thank you so, so much. Make sure until the next time I see you, my friends, you are out there staying safe. Keep letting yourselves have fun. And of course, stay magical out there, friend. If you enjoyed today's episode, if you learned something, or you just love That Witch podcast, one of the best things that you can do is share the show with a friend. Just by reaching out and sharing the link or recommending us to somebody is hands down the best way to help us grow our podcast here. So you can head right now into the podcast app that you're listening to, and you can directly share this episode by using your little share link button, or you can just take a screenshot or just mention That Witch podcast to whoever you're recommending us to, because you can find That Witch podcast on all major podcast listening platforms. Thanks for being such a great neighbor.